Oh, brilliant, thank you very much. So today, what we're going to look at, so just clicking on to the next kind of thing. So basically, when we're looking at re-engaging a child, we're going to look at some of the strategies, some of the things that may be barriers as well, and we're going to try and look at some sort of mechanisms there to help, tips, hints, you know, those kind of little tricks that are there for us. So I'm going to cover routines, anxiety, transitions, you know, the kind of support that we do for disengaged learners, helping children to succeed in school, and then also how we can encourage children to learn at home as well. So there's quite a lot of information that I'm going to cover today, and it's quite a wide variety, and I'm hoping that there's a little bit of something for everybody in here. I'll go straight into routines, because I think this is the kind of thing that you know, we kind of sometimes have, sometimes don't. It's something in schools that we like to use quite a lot. And the reason being is that it really does promote and encourage positive behaviour within a classroom. At home, for families, it can make it clear who's doing what, when they're doing things. It really does kind of give you that clarity. You know, we can set up a nice little routine that it's a certain job. So once you wash up after dinner, that's your job, part of the family routine. It's the same sort of thing when we're in school, that once we finish a piece of work, then we do something next. And as long as we've got that kind of schedule there, it really does kind of get us into that, it kind of into that sort of like schedule of I need to know what I'm doing next. It just becomes that habitual side of this is what happens, then this, and it works really well. And it can really be helpful, especially when we've got those kind of like challenging times. If we think about before school, after school, when we've got to try and get out of the house and there's a lot of things to do, it really works well to help lessen the anxiety, lessen the kind of confrontation that we might have. I know with my son at home, for most people, he's got Velcro trainers. Trying to put Velcro trainers on, he has no fine motor skill problems or challenges, but it takes him about 20 minutes. And I know that I have to try and prep him 20 minutes before, so I've built that into a routine to try and really help him to build upon, let's get that bit of independence, put it into a routine, and then it can be less stressful rather than me at the door going, come on, I'm going to be late for work, which then sets us all off on a bad foot. You know, so if we can try and plan them into those kind of challenging times, it really does alleviate how those kind of emotions start to like come out of us as well. So kind of the other side of that is what I've put on there is that to talk about the routines, because I think that's really important, that we kind of, if we're in the kind of fast-paced lives that we live in and we're trying to get children to do certain things or to take that responsibility and build on that independence, is that they understand why. It might be a family rule, it might even be a law or something along those lines, but it's got to be that the child understands the purpose, understands what it is that you're asking them to do and the reason behind that, because then it actually gives them that kind of understanding to want to do it, and it gives them that autonomy as well. It's a really nice thing to make sure that they do understand. So we've got next things like creating routines. Now, I've put on there that obviously it's really good for families in many ways. It's really good for schools. It helps everything run smoothly, whether you're at home on a family day, whether you're at school as well. And it's you know, it's really nice to help children feel safe, to build those healthy habits. It helps parents feel organised. It kind of manages those stress, which is, I think, kind of touched on, and just makes things a little bit more enjoyable. So I've kind of like put some tips in here, as you can see on the screen in front of you. But if we can kind of plan them around those demanding times, you know, before and after work, it helps them run smoothly, as I've touched around. But it's important to make sure that we add a little bit of downtime in there, just add a little bit of time to sleep, to rest, to recover from those busy times, especially if it's kind of a busy day trip out, that you've had it in your family time, but equally that it's kind of, we've got a routine before school, then we have the demands of school throughout the day. Then we come home and we've got further demands, whether it be after school clubs, homework, whichever, but it's just ensuring that we've got that downtime in there, and it really does help, especially if we can encourage a little bit of unstructured time as well, which I'll touch on a little bit later, because it helps us learn some other skills like empathy as well. But it's also nice as well if you can kind of link activities together within a routine, and then it becomes automated. You know, you can get your child to do a preferred activity with an activity that is less preferred, so therefore it kind of masks and hides the one that they don't necessarily like or want to do. You know, in its simplest form, you can look at something like take your plate to the sink to be washed before they get a pudding. Is kind of a nice example there to kind of think about. Introducing limits to part of your routine as well. That's really nice, especially around things like screen time. So like a routine when if you're just cooking your evening meal, you want your child to do some homework or to do a particular task, and it's similar to what we do in school, is that we'll put timers as well in there. So it can be things like, you know, just make sure you complete this task, whether it's homework, and then you can watch one TV program or whatever it is that comes next. And then we've kind of touched on the kind of explaining around routines, and we're just making sure that we're explaining it in you know, that kind of the simplest format, so that everyone can understand what's expected of them. I'll put on in a little bit in a second about what they might look like, but things like you know, even toddlers, to first we clean the teeth, then it's story time, you know, first this, then that, all the way to more in-depth schedules that you might want to write and create as well. Because that's a similar aspect to how we look at them within school. They are adapted to the level of the learner that's presented in front of us as well. But yeah, and again, just making sure that we understand why they're important. You know, we're having, if we've got changes and adaptations to that kind of routine, making sure that we kind of know that it's all around, you know, we're doing this early today, it's a little bit different to a different day because this happens. And that's the same as what happens in school. You know, sometimes you like have an after school club or whichever, you know, you're going to visit a relative or something like that, and it's that disruption to every other day bar this day we do it a certain method, and it's just making sure they've got that clarity and that understanding. You know, we're having dinner early today because we're going to gymnastics later, and it's similar to kind of what we do. So for example, we go out to forest school, and then the majority of mornings here is literacy and maths. So English and maths, but on one morning it might not be because we're out at forest school on that day. And it's making sure that there's that preparation time before that we know that that's when it is, it's there in a visual, and that we can kind of understand that. But and it's kind of making sure as well that when it's there to be understood, that we're using the language that a child understands. So for example, it can be really tricky to understand time for some children, that we're not going on, you know, you can only watch this for half an hour TV time. Well, when you go and say, right, it's been half an hour, they're like, oh, I didn't know that was half an hour, and I don't feel like prepared to kind of like leave this activity. Whereas if we can say something like, we can only watch one episode, or we can only, you know, watch till the end of the movie or to the end of this, then it kind of puts that pinpoint on there. So just really digging down and understanding that kind of language that we use to transfer to the children as well. Now, say that we've got routines, okay, so we've got a routine, but how do we get a child to follow it? You know, that's the kind of tricky part, isn't it? It really does make it difficult. I've got some ideas that I've put a couple of 4 points there as well. So as I talked about before, about maybe like visuals, for example, like an illustrated poster, you might want the picture to kind of identify what it is. But equally, some of our more able children, they just want it written down step by step, becomes a schedule, becomes that routine. Pin it up, get it up there so that everybody can see it, everybody can follow it. It kind of gives those children the autonomy, they feel that sense of ownership as well, that if it's there, and then look to find those ways to allow the child to follow that routine without any help. You know, there's many ways, you know, from having it up on the wall and just a little pointer said, don't forget, it's just up there, have a little look, think about it, and build the check-in into it as part of your routine. But in the modern day that we live in, you know, you can have reminders on phones and smartwatches, smart speakers as well. There's a multitude of ways out there, but if you can build in those reminders, it builds on that kind of independence then as well. And then think about whether parts of the routine can be actually your child's responsibility. You know, they can learn new skills, they can develop as they're going along, and it's just a fantastic opportunity really for preparation for adulthood. You know, it'll have a huge impact that way. And then, as always, you know, praise, it's a massive thing, making sure that it's there when you know, your child's followed that routine, they've not needed the help and the support, the reminders, you know, they've really built on that independence and they're there. It's very meaningful and it has such a huge impact. So yeah, absolutely make sure that praise is there. But I think there's also a caveat when you're talking about routines as well, isn't there? Is that you know, it's there to help and support, but it is okay to, you know, change your routine and adapt and evolve over time. It's not meant to be inflexible, it's not meant to be rigid, it's not meant to be that it's a hindrance to your life, it's there supposed to be help. You know, and it is okay just to change that and adapt as time goes on, you know, make it work for you. And there's not just like one answer that fits everybody, it's kind of making it personalized and adapted to your level of need as well. Now, I think I've covered quite a lot there on routines. I've kind of given you like that wide variety, and the kind of next topic that I wanted to move on to was anxiety. And I think it's important, firstly, just to cover in a short instance. I'm not going to read the slide exactly, but what anxiety actually is, you know, and how that kind of like impacts us. And it is that kind of feeling of worry, of uneasement, and you know, it impacts us in different ways. Essentially, you know, it can be psychological, it can those thoughts, feelings, but it also can give us physical sensations in our body. And it's okay, it's normal to have those kind of worries at times. But soon after we have those kind of feelings, they do pass. You know, when we start to feel calmer, and that's where we're not talking really around anxiety. It's when anxiety feels that you're more like stuck in that problem. And it's not passing and it's becoming overwhelming as well. So, you know, a child might really be encompassed in that, and they might worry for quite a long time. It may feel unmanageable amounts of anxiety. And then it's kind of like that sign or signal that something's not quite right there. We might need to put a bit of support and help in. And that's what we need to be looking at. And that's the kind of areas that I've looked at. Essentially to kind of help. So with that, there's you know, what makes young people anxious, and it's not necessarily just young people. I think in all honesty, I think you can kind of cover it for a lot of age ranges in you know, all the way to adulthood. Is that, you know, when we've got things like we find you know, the current place where we are, whichever school that we're in, and we can experience, and we're finding it difficult, we can experience anxiety around that. You know, we're around somebody else that's anxious, and that's transferring onto us as well. And we've got to be mindful about our thoughts and feelings and what we project onto others. Being around going through significant change. A significant change happens in many different ways. You know, we have children that transition into our school, which I'll cover transitions in a little minute. But there's a lot of things that happen in home, in our you know, our lives outside of school, and it's just ensuring that you know, we're identifying that if these things are happening, that we're just keeping an eye on what is actually happening with our young people around us. You know, those kind of things to where they're not planned, but things like death and illness in the family, or a close one around us as well. So it's just being mindful of those. Having a lot of responsibility as well can cause us to be anxious, and you know, around that fear of failure, and having to be able to support and cope with all that as well. You know, there's a lot of things going on in the world right now. You know, especially around money, debt, housing, and so forth. It's a very difficult place to be living, I think, in the current circumstances. And I think that also has a massive impact. You know, you can't go a day without seeing the news and something negative being told to us on there. But going through those kind of experiences as well, where the children don't feel safe, you know, whether or not they've had experiences of bullying, they've witnessed something that is not great to witness, or had discrimination against them for varied reasons. And then equally is that we do have neurodiverse children within our schools and our settings and around us, and just not having that correct support, not even being recognised that support is needed, you know, is a massive contributing factor to kind of anxiety around that. So I've put a couple of things in there. Now these are the kind of aspects around that we're in a very anxious moment right now, and we're starting to feel that kind of panicking feeling, and you know, some people go into that hyperventilation, some people start to go red in the face, that clamp up. You know, there's all those signs and symbols, but it's important that we deal with the situation there and then. And I think as this happens, that we've got to kind of look at helping us to calm down, helping children to calm down and feel safe in that instance before we can start to unpick and deal with that. And you know, and in its simplest form is kind of looking at these kind of activities that I've put on there, and it's not that all of them will work and that you have to go through. It's finding that best fit model for your young one at home. And there's lots of different things out there. So I've put on there things like use breathing and grounding exercises. There's rafts and rafts of examples of breathing and grounding exercises, and I just put it as an overarching statement there, is that it's finding ones that work, that you know you can breathe together, you can count, there's hand models that you can go with as well. So finding ones that work with you, and I think just even like going on to the sit and support and offer calm and reassurance is also it's just to let them know that you're there, and sometimes you don't have to say anything. It's okay, you know, you sat there, that bit of close contact can also just offer a hug and a bit of a squeeze, that deep pressure. It just helps at times, isn't it? And also as well is kind of like the redirection of the thought process to trying to get to thinking about a safe place or a safe person, and it just helps us focus onto that kind of notion of that if I'm in my safe place or I'm with my safe person, then I must be in a safe situation, and it starts to make me feel safe. As well on there that I've got them encourage them to do activity that they like, and that's a range of activities. Exercise is one which I've covered in a couple of aspects throughout this, but it's kind of it's there. It helps you feel less anxious for the way that it kind of like manages internally within your body. But it might just be something to redirect. You know, a lot of our children like to create models, do Lego, do drawing or what have you. But yeah, just that kind of caveat. There's limited there examples, but if you dig deep into each one of those, there's an absolute plethora there to kind of look at as well. And then kind of like afterwards, when they kind of to calm down, you know, it can help to remind them that it didn't last forever. You know, yeah, we was in that panicky moment at that time. We've used some strategies. Yeah, some may have worked, some may not. Some may have taken longer this time than they did last time, but it didn't last forever. You know, we've come out of that situation. And then hopefully we can start to look at to that as well. Now, I've put on there that, you know, managing those panicky moments, that if we can look at how that kind of how to deal with that over a longer term, we can really unpick and manage that, you know, the strategies that we understand how it works, how our body works, how to kind of identify it, how we can really kind of move forward to try and really unpick what best works for our young people. But I think it's also important to remember that, you know, there may be a lot of strategies that you try, persevere with that and be resilient. It's natural to feel overwhelmed, which I've put on there as well. You don't need to try a million. I know I've put 5 different things in there, but have a look through to see what might work, what might not work, and give it time to see if there is a bit of an impact. You know, it can be quite quick to, when you see a child, your child, that's kind of going through that and it doesn't work instantly, to kind of dismiss it. This is never going to work, I'm not doing anymore. But, you know, really do try. There'll be a lot of options and suggestions for you. So this is kind of like, as I've discussed, just 1 second, there we go. I've put in there, these are the kind of how to prevent it long term. So think about talking about, you know, and I've put in a calm moment. So this is that kind of, we're back onto baseline. Think about talking about why, you know, we're experiencing that kind of anxiety, what it feels like, you know, and they may not share something, and that's understandable. Don't be tempted to try and fix or dismiss some of the things. You know, be there to listen. It's the value of being listened to is massive around that. You may want to do a little activity around those kind of thoughts and feelings to try and identify what's going on around the kind of anxiety as well. And then to kind of move on to that, to think about what makes us feel anxious. You know, and there's, as we've kind of like looked at already, there's a lot of different things, but it can be anything from a combination of the list that I had up before, and then see about, you know, are there changes that could help us around that to kind of hopefully not make us feel as anxious, and those kind of trigger and hot spots as well. But then understanding how we're presenting and how we can recognize that we're anxious. You know, we've got a sickness feeling or something like that. Is our heart racing? See if they can kind of recognize those signs. And then once we start to feel and we can recognize those signs, we can then start to ask for help, and maybe seek support and around that. And you might want to try some kind of activities around that, you know, to see what can actually help. And I know I've talked about exercise, and I'll kind of like drip that all the way through, but it doesn't have to be that we go for you know, run a marathon of 26 miles or what have you. It can be something as, you know, we just go for a walk around the corner. But also there's other simple strategies around that, you know, writing in a journal, to spending some time doing Lego, cooking, baking. You know, you can even go into like mindful activities that I've put on there, you know, whether it's yoga, meditation, mindful colouring. You know, there's lots of different ones out there. You know, we've got the technology that we have in our hands now. There's apps out there, you know, mindful and meditation apps such as Headspace and Calm are two to name. You might want to go on and find some sort of like guided meditation. Just make sure that you check it first to see that it is going to be something that you want the child subjected to. Some children like to do worry boxes as well. Writing down what it is that they're worrying about and putting it into a place where the worries can be held, and that's where it's going to be stored and stored away from them. Or even the opposite of that is the self-soothe. So these are the strategies that help us, and then when we're feeling a little bit worried, we can go into the self-soothe box and find a strategy to help myself to self-soothe. They're nice little techniques as well when we're feeling anxious. But equally as well, just making sure that we're helping them take care of their daily needs, you know, that we have got kind of like that look on how our mental health is, and you know, making sure that we've got some sort of movement, exercise, that we're having good nice sleep, we're taking enough, you know, food and fluid, and it's healthy what we're doing as well, and making sure that we're connecting and having time to spend together as well. And I've put on there, you know, cut out stimulants, which it's an interesting one, because it's very easy to say, come on, we'll put the kettle on, we'll go and have a brew, we'll have a bit of a chat, we'll make a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, or what have you. But you know, we need to start thinking about maybe reducing caffeinated drinks and so on, because they can trigger symptoms of anxiety as well. But it is important that we do that. We do spend the time together. You know, we help children take the mind off the worries, and you know, and you have fun together. You know, you start talking about other things, other interests, taking an interest in there, and it will really work. But obviously, never forget that if you are worried, that there are professionals out there, you know, and don't be afraid to use them. You know, you can speak to the school, you can speak to your doctor and your pediatrician and so on. You know, and they'll signpost you where the kind of best place to find help is, essentially. Now, I did kind of like do a bit of research around, you know, what are young children telling us about like anxiety and so forth, you know, and what helps them. And I thought it was very important just to put in there, you know, that I pulled this from youngminds.org.uk, is that, you know, they like it really helps them to think about something that you're looking forward to those kind of like positive moments that are about to come. You know, imagine your thoughts leaving your brain, floating off into the sky, and this is kind of like the worry box again, keeping yourself occupied and busy, and then you can be a part of that, as we do. These are all strategies that we've kind of implemented within schools. Have time out, reflect on how you're feeling, talk to others that you trust, and remind yourself that you're not alone, because it can feel very isolating. And I think that's the whole point. If we can talk to people, those kind of reminding yourself that you're not alone, it comes hand in hand. You know, that kind of like a problem shared is a problem halved. sayings there for that kind of notion as well. So moving on to transitions, you know, there's a lot of things that will overlap over on the transitions as well, and I've kind of covered quite a few things within transitions. So, for example, if we can recognise the reasons why transitions can be challenging, I think is you know, we're onto a bit of a winner into some aspects, because then it kind of helps us with the rest, and then it all becomes like a snowballing effect, so that we can kind of look at that. You know, there's a lot of things that impact transitions and why they are challenging. So whether or not it's a social change, you know, if we're entering a new school and we're transitioning into a new school, whether that be going from primary to high or just from one school to the next, you know, there's a lot of things that are different, and that does give us that sense of unease, you know, whether it's new school systems, new teachers, new communities, you know, just that new building, knowing where to go. There's a lot of things around there that we need to be aware of and try and identify, and I think if we can identify the concerns as well, you know, it'd be really positive to then kind of look at the strategies and some of the coping mechanisms that we can put in as well, so that if we think about that, we've also not just got the transition of maybe going into a new place, but we've also got the children grow up, you know, and we go from a child to a teenager and so on, and that kind of, we experience new friendship groups, and you know, we might start focusing on different peers and new experiences. They may change the sense of the self as well into some aspect. Just being mindful of that, and then if we revert back to, you know, how schools are, that we've got the academic challenges as well that come with them, you know, and schools do a lot about how they can ease those academic challenges and work with them, but we've got to be aware of them and recognise the reasons around them, you know, because there will be, as children grow and learn, increased schoolwork, the complexity of that work as well, and that we've got classes that will change, and we go from, you know, a narrow kind of like set of subjects within primary up until when you get to high school and you get the options and choices of going on to do different GCSEs. It can be very overwhelming as well, but equally we've got the flip side of that, that it might be even more interested in, and we become hyper focused into a subject we've never done before, that we're one that we've always had an interest in, that we love, and that's where we become encompassed in. But then again, as we start to learn, and we've got different types of assessment and learning methods, but equally all those thoughts and feelings that come with it and those emotions, is that we become apprehensive, or we can become apprehensive, our children become apprehensive, and it's just remembering to normalize and validate those kind of thoughts, feelings and emotions. You know, listen out for them, and let them know that it is okay to feel that way, and it can be difficult to hear your child's distress without trying to problem solve or improve the mood, you know, immediately, but whilst problem solving and trying to cheer them up may be helpful, spending time hearing the emotion first and sitting with feelings can be powerful. You know, listen to your child and accepting how they're feeling and communicating that their emotions, experiences are important, you know, without dismissing their experience. You can help them realize that others also have those feelings, and you might do this by letting them know that mixed feelings about school are common, and taking time to settle in is expected, and then you can use things like coping strategies around those feelings and start to develop them, and you know, and there's kind of like basic tools around that. You know, you take some deep breaths, count to 10 in your head, you know, kind of thinking about asking for help, building those relationships with the teachers, the staff, and anybody who's around as well, and talking about those emotions and kind of sitting down and trying to problem solve why we're feeling around this as well. And I think one of the really good things that we can do for children is really encourage flexible thinking. You know, there's a lot of new experiences that come with transitions, whether it be from one school to the next or not, but those kind of new challenges, those different social opportunities, you know, I encourage your child to be open to experiences, and kind of not to make that assumption of what or who they will or won't like, and what will be the outcome of that. Is, is kind of like, you know, allow it to kind of like go with the motion and see what happens, and let them make their own mind up as it unfolds, rather than having a predetermined outcome. And as I've touched already about like routines and so forth, it's just as well, it's trying building like healthy habits as well, you know, healthy diet plan, talking about exercise as well, making sure that we're having a good night's sleep, setting maybe boundaries around bedtime, and just scaffolding those, you know, that healthy school life balance as well will really help. I think as well is that we also always have to be mindful and being aware that if we've got a child that's you know, showing signs of not coping, and I think if they are showing signs that they're not coping, or whatever that be, whether it's negative talk or you know, they're not engaging in something they would normally engage in, that I know I've just talked about sleep and making sure they've got enough time for it, or maybe they're not sleeping, and it's not through the lack of trying. And I think if we're looking at those kind of steps, that is, you know, it's very important that we start to look at supportive strategies, and you know, and we communicate that we may need help, and you know, we talk with the school, we talk with other professionals, you know, because there's flexibility and tailored help for a child, and it can be adapted to kind of unpick what they're finding difficult within a transition, and you know, I'm really to try and make that work, you know, for the best possible outcome as well. And I think kind of covered quite a bit there with transitions, and I think there's the kind of like that overarching. There's a lot of information that I've put out there, but it's just remembering as well that there's multiple strategies. The first strategy may not work in the first instance, and I'll go back to that kind of like being resilient and giving some things time, you know, and that kind of high levels of communication of what the, you know, who for all people that are involved within the transition, to try and make you know, that plan the best it can be. So I went on with some some tips to supporting disengaged pupils, and these are kind of a wide variety of support kind of top tips. So whether they're from children that are disengaged to going into school, but also to children that might not want to go into school. So I kind of try to cover the both aspects of that. But I think it can be kind of intimidating. I think when we've got those kind of trying to get a young person to re-engage as well. But I think one of the things to be mindful of is that, you know, there's a raft of free resources out there. I've covered a few, as you can see on the screen, but there are far more out there for you to kind of like have a little look at as well. But I thought these are some good key tips out there, and I think that kind of, as always, whether it's identifying or understanding, it's digging down to find why something is happening, whether or not it's a child that's being disengaged, they're finding something difficult, whatever it is. But in this part here, it's okay, why are we actually disengaged from what is happening right now? You know, why do we not want to engage in the learning process? And what's more appealing to them now, that they would rather be doing that than engage in learning. And I think that's the kind of first step, as always. Understand what you're dealing with, understand what is the kind of barrier right now, and then it can go straight into, right, okay, well, let's make a plan around it, let's implement some support systems around that. If we've got a disengaged person, you know, making sure they've got everything that they need. You know, we've got neurodivergent children, and they may not learn in a similar way, or the typical way that most you know, mainstream children do. And within that, we may have to get creative and, you know, really to break down those barriers, whether it be that it's something as simple as that we've got I don't know, a fidget toy that helps some young people to concentrate, but also that we may have to look at more multimedia ways of learning, that how we record information, we record learning, and demonstrate our knowledge and understanding, to potentially that it gives children a chance to play back something that's happened in a lesson to help them understand that there's something they were finding difficult at the time, and they can do that in their own time. You know, there's many ways in to do that, and I think that's where we'd look at that kind of tailored individual approach as well. Now, I've moved on to about being that kind of that approachable and that caring. side, and this is where that we find students can find that disengagement can stem from that fear of authority figures, that they don't want to ask questions, they don't know you, you're an unfamiliar face. We spent 6 weeks off from summer, and we've not really seen you, or however long that is, or even if it was part of the transition process and coming to a new school and we've never met. But spending that time to build relationships, I think, is really important and key. I think without that, I think we're asking for somebody to do something or to be somewhere that they have that kind of worry and that anxiety around, and it's just making sure that we've got those relationships built on, so students feel comfortable around the teachers. Especially within the school, so that they're more likely to kind of communicate, reach out for help when they need it, and engage in the learning a little bit more. And I think the next part is that when we have disengaged learners, you can be persistent. It can be draining, and it can seem fruitless. It can be a tricky task. And I've put on there to be resilient and positive about it. It's because it can be a long journey, and it's remembering that it's a long journey at times, because if we start to feel drained by it, if we start to feel the kind of negative around it, then that is going to transfer over to the child, and that journey is going to become even longer to re-engaging into learning as well. So just kind of keeping that positive mental attitude and keep the wheels turning around, supporting and getting back into that learning really does work. And then part of that is making sure that where I've talked about relationships, and as parents, carers, you'll know your children inside and out, and you'll know what really excites them, what really motivates them, and ensuring that is passed on to the schools to allow them to kind of help tailor and individualize that kind of approach. But equally, it might be there as a kind of that common discussion points as well. It really does help to kind of re-engage in that learning with that. And then as I've mentioned a couple of times already about that kind of movement and exercise and so on, as some children, they have a lot of emotions to deal with, especially as they start to get older, but it can manifest into excess energy, which can cause distraction. It can result in them doing less in class but more movement and not really concentrating, but just creating those opportunities for movement and that healthy exercise as well would really help. It lessens the anxiety, as I've already talked about, which is a really good thing to be looking at. But that kind of healthy body, healthy mind scenario really does help with that kind of re-engagement as well, because it lessens those kind of distractions. But that kind of reflection as well, as I've put on there, is that if we can encourage reflection and kind of create those opportunities to sit down, to connect, to have a conversation, to unpick what went well, what didn't, maybe what can we do better next time, it kind of helps identify what's going on in our young people's head, and then that's where we can kind of tailor the support if needed. But it's also a great opportunity to celebrate the successes as well. So when it is what went well, it's like, well, that's amazing. Let's build on that. Let's take that step forward and move forward with that and re-engaging. And as I've touched on already about communication on there, is that essentially is that communication is key. We make sure that we have good homeschool communication and it's regular, just to make sure that kind of unified approach is adopted, that this is a positive relationship between school and the parent, and this builds trust and confidence for a child as well. And just if they can see that and it transfers onto them, it kind of helps build that kind of, alleviates any anxieties and worries, and hopefully kind of helps us in that kind of step in the right direction to re-engage into their learning as well. So I've kind of covered a few top tips there. Hopefully you've got some takeaway points from that as well. But like I said, there's RAFs out there. Have a little search on the internet and you'll find many, many more. They won't all work for everyone, but there will be hopefully something, one or two there that you can take away that will be beneficial to yourself. And I think moving on to that kind of aspect of learning within a school is that, you know, is helping them to succeed, is that there's lots of ways that we can encourage learning, and those ways can be very varied, but it's just making sure that we kind of have those stepping stones to success within school. And you know, and failure, believe it or not, is part of that. It's part of the learning curve, you know, and that is okay. And not necessarily that we want children to fail all the way through education, because that's far from what we're trying to say. What we're looking at is that, you know, if first you don't succeed, try again, and having that kind of resilience, you know, learning from our mistakes and having that kind of self-learn is a really good skill to have. You know, and children do this with two key traits. So a little fear of failure and resilience to push through are the two. You know, and once you can kind of master those, it really does help children to succeed in school. And you know, there's little tricks and traits that you can do with that, like chess, for example. It's a really good game because chess isn't a game of chance. You know, it's a game of logic, and it really taps into children's logic. There's problem solving, strategic planning. It requires a lot of discipline, a lot of concentration, and these are all skills that are transferable as well. But as a parent, carer, and an adult within a child's life as well, you can look at things like telling them of your own failures and how you overcame them, giving them real life examples about how you became who you are. Because if a child can relate to that, it's like, whoa, so you've made mistakes? It's like, yeah, no, there isn't such thing as the perfect person. You know, it's all part of that learning curve, and it'll help them connect that up with you know, their future learning as well. And I know I've touched on praise and making sure that we are using praise, but making sure that when we are using praise that it's realistic. I think it's not setting that kind of over expectation on a child that it becomes too driven to the point of, you are amazing, you will never ever get anything wrong, you know, you are superb. But just making sure that it is realistic, because that kind of power of setting positive but realistic expectations is far greater than kind of like that overpraise. So that children then, if they kind of like fail at something or get something wrong, and you know, we can see it to the point of that we could be doing something as simple as colouring, and we come out of the line that it's, what are other people going to be thinking of me now? I'm supposed to be this kind of like sense of perfect, and I've just made a mistake and I can't now overcome this. So just make sure that it's kind of realistic, and that praise is, you know, be specific around it, and really honing on to the skill that the child's been demonstrating. But I think equally, you know, making learning an activity that your child loves, that I've put on there, and it's always around that. You know, life and learning is harder if you're ever seen as it's a chore. You know, and there's a lot of research around that if you're in a good mood, it makes you smarter, more engaged, more creative. You know, it's kind of that mood management. So I encourage your child to kind of like enjoy that love for learning and create those opportunities even, because then it becomes a lot easier, especially with a positive mindset as well. And I think one of the key things as well as a parent is that we kind of focus on, and I do this as a parent as myself, is that I'll go into like a parents' evening and they'll tell me my child's doing right, doing this, and I'll focus on what they're not doing so well at, rather than what they're doing really well at. And I think it's kind of just remembering that in the world that we are at the moment, it's kind of it isn't important to be, you know, superb, and it's not even impossible, you know, to be good at absolutely everything. It's more important to be, you know, excellent at a few things, because that's the kind of hyper specialism kind of world that we live in. And I think if we do have those kind of opportunities to let our children follow their passion, that the kind of activities that they love to do, the lessons that they love to do, is to really hone in on that, you know, and drive and motivate that forward, so that we can kind of unpick what's happening around there to then hopefully use those skills to help transfer onto those kind of less loved topics as well. And then that's how we can kind of match it up as well. But then if we look at kind of the relevance of academic subjects, is that some children as well find that it can be a barrier to am I doing this? This isn't going to help me. I'm going to be this when I'm older. It's just ensuring that if we can create opportunities to make sure that they feel that this is something that happens in school, and why it happens in school, because it helps us in the real life. Because if we can't see how it's going to be relevant in our life, it's really hard to focus and enjoy that, and try and create those opportunities when you're out and about, especially when it's the holidays. If you're out traveling, involve your child in map reading, and identify that's something you do in geography. Ask them to help finding, translations of words if you're going abroad, different languages. There can be all sorts that you can kind of, look into, like that culture side of it. But even to the point of if you're just doing like homemade experiments at home, making modeling clay or slime, those are kind of like science experiments, telling us chemistry. But even, we slip, trip and fall, we get bruises, is what we do. Start talking about the biology side of that and dipping into that kind of learning as well. And if we can make learning relevant, then it really makes it enjoyable and gives it that purpose to why we're actually doing it. And then I've covered onto there as well, just to kind of like involve, learning as much as possible into kind of like games. There's a lot around making, a lot of studies around what's it's called gamification, and it's basically to describe the action of turning something into a game. To improve engagement, and I think that can be transferred to something at home as well. Is that if you're trying to do something to kind of get a child motivated or so forth, in its simplest form, turn it into a game. It's a great technique to use, and hopefully it'll pick up that engagement, that motivation as well. And then I've kind of put on there is that motivate children by consequence rather than punishment. And I think we've probably all done it. We've all been there. That it's the if you don't do this, I'm taking it away. If you don't finish your homework in about 10 minutes, I'm going to take your iPad off you. And it's kind of like a punishment style there. Whereas if we can look at like the consequences, it can be in its simplest form. That it's kind of, I think my wife will try and do it to me. That points of if that I don't put my clothes into the washing basket, then after about 5 days, and I'm thinking to myself, I may have no clean clothes. Well, if it was in the washing basket, they would have been washed, wouldn't they? And it's kind of that cause and effect, and that's what adult life is determined by. And that's what we've got to start looking at, is that kind of preparation for adulthood. And if we motivate by consequences rather than that punishment, we can really help children to learn that kind of self-control. We can build self-esteem. We can problem solve as well. So I think it's just making sure that we kind of look at what is relevant to real life and what comes forward from that. And then moving on to kind of like depth of processing, I thought was a nice one to little touch on as well. So things like when we're learning, we kind of, even if it's just like looking at revising for exams or preparation for something that's coming up, is that it's very easy just to go over and over and over, and I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this, and just to keep doing it. And there's a lot of research out shows there that is space out your practice, is that give time in between each time that you're looking at it. So that there's, I think one of the ones that I did kind of come across at one point was that if you leave longer gaps between there, is that the studies were showing that you actually score higher on kind of like grades tests as well. But as we've already touched on as well, thinking about failing is occasionally good. Giving that kind of opportunity to have a go, to make mistakes, to learn on those, to kind of build on that kind of understanding really works. And making sure that we're rested as well. It's key and it's important that if we want that kind of depth of processing, is that we've got to have that kind of like healthy mind and making sure we've had enough sleep and so on as well. And that comes hand in hand with that kind of like switching off time, that downtime. We've talked about relaxation as well, about what the kind of options there are out there. So if I move on to now then say like accessing like the internet as well in a safe way, just making sure that it's important. I think in the world that we live in today, that the internet's out there. It's a powerful tool. It's absolutely key for learning. It kind of helps children build that independence to be able to go and find information, to self-teach themselves, to problem solve. And I know people can be apprehensive around it because we limit screen time, is that it can be like a virtual babysitter at times. It can just help us have a little bit of space, but it's such a key time, and it's highly beneficial to try and give that kind of like tech time for good learning time. And I think as long as we look at kind of some basic rules around that, you know, we can kind of like set times around it and manage time limits, you know, and a tip around that is just maybe have the computer or what have you in a public room within the house, so you can monitor what the child's on, and can monitor how long they're on for as well. But ensuring that we've got a bit of a, you know, that kind of protection on there, that you know, whether or not it's internet filtering for safe access, antiviruses and so on. But I'm sure web providers will be able to help you with that, your internet service provider, because they have a lot of free tools, and you know, there's a lot of help and support out there as well. But then equally allowing time to learn empathy is something that I think's really hard to kind of do as a parent. And I think, you know, they tend to relate and do better within the world when they've got empathy. And can you teach it? Well, the short answer is no, you can't. But all you can do is create opportunities for it to happen and for a child to learn. And the more you kind of like encourage it, though, the more you get in the way as a parent, I think sometimes. But it's kind of key around, you know, allowing children to have those kind of unstructured playtime and learn in the moment, without our involvement, without our interruption. And a really good way as well is to kind of allow children to learn with varied ages, allow them to play different together, whether it be within, you know, clubs. You can create opportunities, you know, whether it be Cub Scouts, guides, wherever. You know, there's a lot of different access to that as well, and I think they're great opportunities to allow children to learn by empathy. You know, and don't be afraid as well. I put on there as a little bit of a bonus tip is that lead by example. Give some of them a go yourself as well. You know, don't be afraid to share your experiences as you go along as well. And then I'm going to move on to kind of that learning at home. And I think it's a big key kind of focus point. I think there's quite a lot overlooked about how to create, you know, a good environment for learning at home. And I think it's just remembering that as a parent, you play a crucial role in this. And it really is an important thing that you can support children, you know, to create a positive learning environment. It can help children be motivated, engaged, you know, they build confidence in the learning. So I've got some kind of like tips here. There's 4 there, which I'll go into a little bit more detail. Is that if we can encourage that independence and that curiosity, you know, it really does benefit. And, you know, you can do that in a multitude of ways, from making sure they've got access to a range of educational materials and resources, whether it be books or whether it be on the internet, or just hand-on learning activities. Allowing children to choose their own topics and have their own autonomy around that, and you know, let them explore and make discoveries themselves. Let them ask questions and experiment. You know, they'll find new ideas, they'll find new concepts, and just promote those kind of and provide those opportunities to kind of take on challenges and responsibilities. You know, projects are really good for that, completing a project or solving a problem. But then also showcasing that work as well is really nice, and I think that does really work as well. Is that you know, they can present and share their kind of work. You know, fostering that independence and curiosity, it really does help, and with that. But I think it's key as well is to make sure that we've got that dedicated study space. You know, ensuring that it's clutter-free. If they've got that designated space, it can be quiet, it can be organised. You know, it is crucial at this point. You know, it helps establish that you can create routine to there, you can set expectations, and you can be really productive in your learning when you've got that space there with everything that you need. And just making sure that it is quiet and organised. You know, it can really help that focus. It can help with concentration, increase motivation, and I think it really does help children feel confident and in control, which obviously can have a positive impact on their education as well. And then I've gone on to foster a growth mindset, and this is really important that we do kind of look at and focus around the kind of the ability to keep going, and it's the importance of effort, you know, and keep having a go rather than just what the outcome's going to be and being fixed on that. You know, and there's lots of ways that we can kind of look at it, is that we really want children to embrace the challenges and persevere in the face of difficulties. You know, it really does stand them and you know, really well and later in life, and you can kind of do that by really emphasizing the effort and the importance of effort and hard work in learning, rather than just like natural ability from people. We can kind of look at how we want to embrace challenges rather than just viewing them as obstacles or barriers or failures. You know, we celebrate the process of the learning and the progress rather than the end result. But we can focus about how we got there rather than what we did at the end. Then it can really help us kind of like have that mindset, which is really nice as well. But then also showing that interest and support in the learning by asking questions, I think is key. You know, and then offering that guidance, that feedback, and celebrating the successes, no matter how small they are. I think really does help, you know, foster that growth mindset, and that's the sort of thing that we want to really for our children to develop. You know, so that's the kind of the ways. And then to kind of look at the positive language as well. I think that kind of is something that I think we can overlook at times. And I think if we look at the kind of the language that we use and what we're portraying onto a child, is just kind of thinking about what's the message that we really want to get across here, you know, and how helpful is that message. So if we're emphasizing on the kind of the language that's about effort and progress, you know, instead of saying that you're not very good at this, and I'm not necessarily saying that everybody would, but things like, you know, keep trying, you're getting better every time. It's that encouragement that we're looking at. We're trying to foster that kind of keep going, you're doing really well, you know, that kind of aspect of it, rather than looking at the negative where we're putting that positive spin on. You know, and sometimes if we move on to things like, you know, we do have children and they may show sort of like a form of behaviour, and then if we can focus around that behaviour rather than the child, so instead of, you know, that's naughty, you're bad, whatever, that's not really what we should be looking at. Is that we focus around the behaviour. That behaviour is not helpful. We're kind of labelling the behaviour. We're looking at what the thing is not helpful and what we might need to do the work on, rather than it being personal to the child. And I think that goes equally the other way, is using specific praise. Instead of saying good job, you know, well done, it's very generic. What is the job that I've done good? What am I doing well at? You know, really be specific. You know, try that. I really appreciate how hard you've worked on whatever it is that they've worked on. You know, and I think that really will help, because then if a child understands that, do you know what, I've done amazing at this, I'm going to do that again and transfer that skill to something else, it really does help them learn. And I think just making sure that we've not kind of got any sort of comparisons, you know, why can't you be more like another child or what have you. You know, really kind of honing in on the, you know, I know you can do it, unique, you've got the strengths and talents, you keep going, it's personalised to them. And then just be the biggest fan, I think, is, you know, I think we're always flying the flag for our children, and it's kind of those things of when they're finding something maybe a little bit difficult or what have you, you know, believe in you, and you know, let's do this together, I'm there for you. I think it's massive in that kind of growth mindset, and you know, it really does have that kind of long-lasting impact on learning and motivation as well. Now, obviously, I didn't know everything that was in here, and I had to do a bit of research. I have put a bit of credit, but it kind of reinforces that mindset of there's a lot of information out on the internet, and I hope that everything there has been helpful for you. But there's a couple of websites there that I've used, but there's a lot more Yeah, and I think I'll welcome any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. That was absolutely brilliant. There was so much useful information there. I'll just ask this one question that we had through on email, which was related to the webinar, which was, how do I help my non-verbal autistic son, who is 4 years old, with learning? He's due to start reception at an SEN school this September.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is kind of where it comes with a lot of the aspects that I've already covered today. I didn't specifically go into things like non-verbal, but I think that's where, if we talk about like routines, when I start to talk about like schedules and things like that, I kind of only like just touch the surface with that. And I think it's kind of like using the kind of visuals, the schedules, putting in those kind of routines. You know, there's a lot of visuals that we can kind of put in place if we have a routine that we kind of know what is expected. Equally, that homeschool communication is going to be key, and parents are going to be a massive part to play in that, as our school. You know, absolutely, and it can be very daunting. I totally appreciate that, but it's being part of that transition and making sure it's an adapted, tailored approach. High visuals, absolutely. You know, whatever method, whether it's communication book and using, you know, that kind of exchange of visuals, I think probably going to be key in that. But just making sure that there's a lot of team around the young person, I think it's going to be kind of valued there as well.